Our political commentators today are Dale Husband and Ben Thomas. Kia ora kōrua. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Morena.
Kia ora.
Look, let's begin with a brief, I guess, assessment of New Zealand's position in this latest development in the Middle East. As of yesterday, and I'm just trying to see if there's any update, as of yesterday the Foreign Minister saying it was too soon to have a position. They needed to learn more. We've heard the Prime Minister, who is in Belgium, I think, at the moment, talking about how this is an opportunity for diplomacy. We have had others calling on New Zealand to criticise the US for this move, and a very lively Security Council meeting, not surprisingly, has been underway this morning. What's the situation as far as you read it, Ben? What does New Zealand say? What does New Zealand do in these circumstances?
Well, this is a sort of situation where New Zealand politicians and leaders are in the same kind of position that pundits are, which is to say they're largely takers of information in this situation. We are, hardly being sort of clasped to the bosom of the United States and Israel as they plan their moves on Iran. And this I guess emphasises the sort of place that we have. You've got to say something,
though, don't you?
Well,
I mean, do you believe in the UN? Do you believe in international law? Do you believe, in process?
Yeah.
And therefore, do you say something? And
I think you look at the kind of, as a template for, what might be pushing the absolute bounds, back to what Luxon was saying about the, Liberation Day tariffs, where, it's the sort of thunderous affirmation of the rules-based order and, countries abiding by international law without any direct criticism of any of the particular actions of the United States. And that's the kind of situation that we find ourselves in. It's got to be remembered, people often say New Zealand is a moral voice here because of our anti-nuclear stance, the sort of New Zealand bats above its weight, sort of the punches above its weight sort of myth. We are living in a very different world now. It's pretty clear that the United States is shucking off increasingly any sort of idea of idealism in international affairs, any idea that its regime can kind of be shamed by peer nations in international forums. We have less leverage with this administration than we have had in the past because they don't really seem to care that much about their moral standing in the world, in a rules-based order. And, that does weigh on the choices that are available to New Zealand, even more so than our limited ability to have an impact already as a small country.
All right, Christopher Luxon just quoting him here from Belgium saying, we do not want to see a nuclear-armed Iran, but now there is an opportunity as we look forward from these strikes to actually get around and use diplomacy and dialogue and negotiation to actually get a political solution in place. Let's see if that's how things unfold, Dale. But again, we're looking at our own political leaders, as Ben has outlined, finding themselves in a very difficult situation and walking a very fine line in how they respond to an event on this scale.
Well, I'm doing the same here too, out of respect for the work you do, Catherine, and the organisation that's trying to provide a balanced viewpoint to these international affairs. I suppose, thrown into the mix of what could be libel or defamation. If I really said what I thought about the United States leader, we could find ourselves in some trouble. So everyone's tiptoeing around here. Of course we should be condemning what's happened here. Of course we should be condemning the unilateral decision by, I've used the term unhinged before, leader of the free world, who relies on Truth Social to issue what he thinks we should all know about. Organisations, media outlets, we need to be exposed to different perspectives, and at the moment seem to be almost completely swamped with a Western viewpoint of what is happening. It's deplorable, Catherine, to wake up and to hear of these preemptive strikes. How would it be if we all wandered around our communities punching people because we thought they were going to punch us? It's just bizarre. And, it's very hard to hold your tongue when you realise, just how bullyish this is seen to be. And again, as I've mentioned before, surely at this time of Matariki, our hearts should be with the kids, the women, the civilians who are being killed in Gaza, now morphing into Iran. Next thing it'll be Syria. And who knows where this is all going. Nostradamus reckons he knew where it was going, and that was Armageddon out of Persia, and we might be right on the cusp of it.
All right. Syria's had its, change of leadership, of course, in recent months. I don't know if that has de-escalated things there somewhat. Back to the politics, yet no definitive criticism out of our leaders, and I don't hear from either of you that you anticipate any.
I wouldn't anticipate it. I mean, look, obviously a rules-based order is very important for a small, essentially geopolitically powerless country, except compared to some of our sort of minnow neighbours, which we might get onto next. But for New Zealand, it's very important that we have a sort of stable world order. That doesn't seem to be the direction of travel right now. We do seem to be going back to a sort of red and tooth and claw kind of state of nature, which is bad, obviously, and so New Zealand should be sort of flying the flag to the extent that we can without damaging our interests.
The Prime Minister is in Europe, if I recall correctly, in part because NATO is meeting, and we're not a member of NATO, obviously, but I think we have some kind of observer status, or certainly invited. I think the last 2 or 3 NATO meetings at least, we've had representation there. This is the other matter building in the background, isn't it, Dale, which is the situation again in Europe and the militarisation, the increase in defence spending that seems to be happening everywhere at the moment.
The world can take some comfort in the fact that we're sending over a Hercules. Catherine, sometimes the commentary that our little proud nation is able to impart to the world stage needs to factor in the very special treaty relationship that is at the cornerstone of us as a nation. And so there are perspectives that are valuable here from First Nations peoples and the way that we see our responsibilities towards each other globally. I don't see that being factored in. And of course, if it was a Maori viewpoint, a First Nations, a particular Aotearoa viewpoint, would be loud in condemnation. But we tiptoe around because of the economic repercussions that could come our way, and really, as Ben touched on, a relatively minor player in the international geopolitical scene, we can still punch above our weight. We are highly respected in First Nations thinking across the globe. We should use it as a tool to voice our disappointment, our disgust at what is happening in the Middle East right now.
All right. As of Friday, the big story, you just alluded to it, Ben, was the Prime Minister's on the eve of his meeting of President Xi in China, and we learn that 2 weeks ago, I think it was, New Zealand moved to suspend a portion of funding, significant portion of funding to the Cook Islands in this ongoing dispute the government is having with the government of the Cook Islands. The Foreign Minister specifically saying that this was the reason for this funding being suspended. And we were all thinking, gosh, why has this come out on the eve of the Prime Minister's meeting with President Xi? What's going on here? Is something going on here? Well, is something going on here? Because it was only 2 weeks before that this move was made, Ben.
Well, I mean, what's going on is, the version of the great game that New Zealand can participate in, which is essentially with our small neighbours and
yes, but
allies.
Why was the timing 2 weeks before the Prime Minister's visit to China?
I guess I would look. I mean, it's all speculation, right? But New Zealand does have to sort of make a stand with, it's immediate.
So it is just coincidental timing, you were saying, that it was that close to the visit?
I don't think it would have been intended to be a sort of shot across the bow, but, you've got to make the consequences clear to the Cook Islands that, it's not going to be a sort of and situation in terms of patronage from New Zealand and China.
Well, can that end up being unintended consequences again? If the opportunity is there for China for a growing, deepening relationship, is this not what's happened in other parts of the Pacific?
Well, it's got to be done very carefully. I mean, the people of the Cook Islands
have a particular
have a
relationship,
much more
of course.
natural, affiliation to New Zealand, and that seems to be where the popular mood is. I think this is one of those situations where you have to be careful to sort of say, look, it is it's the Premier, it's Mark Brown, that is at issue here. That's what the kind of sanction, if you were going to call it that, is directed towards, is his behaviour, not towards the people of the Cooks. And that's you are running a fine line there.
The repercussions financially of the people of the Cooks.
Yeah, although look, they're a democracy, so we presumably they're amenable to the same kind of political pressures that any democratic government are. So
it's kept quiet for 2 weeks, and then it comes out. Cook Islands reports it, I think, the night before, the Friday morning that everyone else was reporting it, the day before the Prime Minister's meeting with Xi Jinping, which, it has to be said, appeared to go well. Certainly the public pronouncements that happen at the start of these meetings that are intended for public consumption, very constructive from New Zealand's perspective.
Yeah, but they can't help, the Chinese can't help but be noting our attitude here. So it's pretty patronising, isn't it? And, Winston gets a bit bully boy when it comes to the Cook Islands, but his timidity knows no bounds when it comes to Trump. That's the way it's coming across. And, of course, the ups and downs that China were referencing is very much right here, stark in front of us. It was a bit disrespectful for Brown not to have noted to New Zealand that discussions were about to take place, bearing in mind the relationship signed off in the early 2000s. But our response to it didn't reflect well, and very much, I think, was in the referencing the ups and downs of a relationship that continues to be tested at times. And I know that our Prime Minister rolled out the Kapahaka group over there to say everything's rosy back in little old Aotearoa, but in actual fact the Chinese are looking right through that and seeing that, well, are we friend or foe? And to be highly critical of their right to do military exercises in the Tasman is evidence of that.
Yeah, I don't know what was said privately with respect to that particular incident. But certainly in the public comments, which are, as we said, for the public consumption before the media are out of there, they were fairly warm and, constructive comments from President Xi towards the Prime Minister Luxon. More on his challenges sometimes in getting positive constructive feedback in the polls in a moment. So let's just move forward then to what is happening at the moment, to what is happening at home. And while the Prime Minister has been away on both of these ventures, some very difficult polls have landed. Not so much the numbers themselves, Dale, but some of for example, in the Ipsos poll and also some of the attitudinal stuff that was done in the post-Freshwater poll carries warnings for the government, doesn't it? Because it is showing some weak points that are feeding into what those numbers, those headline numbers are.
I'd have to think so. And again, really New Zealanders are making the decisions at the checkout. And so are you running the country as well as you should be? Well, I just had to pay $5 more for a block of cheese. So maybe no. It could be as simple as that, Catherine.
It's a case in point, actually. I think it was the Ipsos poll that found Labour now regarded as being preferable to National in terms of managing the cost of living.
Yeah, and one thing I thought was interesting in that Ipsos poll, in terms of because it bucked a little bit against the trend. Other polls had sort of cost of living reducing a little in importance. Ipsos had it sort of spiking back up again. Obviously, it's the dominant issue, but just in terms of its relative positioning, that National has successfully owned that issue now, and the economy. Luxon has really lashed himself and Willis to the mast of the ship in terms of, this is the year of economic growth, the economic growth ministry, the going for growth agenda. So now the public very much identifies those issues with them. And that's not necessarily good if cost of living is going up. So I think the Freshwater poll showed that, the majority of people said that the current government, or not the majority, sorry, a plurality of people, about 27%, said that the current government was responsible for the economy. and that was more than the state of the economy, and that's more than thought the previous government or the pandemic or whatever. So it is difficult for them, and that's probably a continuing drag on Luxon's own personal polling. Again, he's never going to be a Key, he's never going to be a Jacinda, but in terms of being identified with those issues when people are still doing it tough. So look, the potential upside for the government is that they're closely identified with it. So if GDP keeps going up, once interest rates have fully gone through, interest rate cuts have fully come into the economy, and if people are doing well heading into the election, that's great news for the government. So, but it's a bit of a white knuckle ride for them coming up to that.
And goodness, we've seen the manufacturing and service numbers come out, which are more recent than those GDP numbers. Now you've got the risk around disruptions to oil, to global oil, etc. So, it is more than a white knuckle ride. But his own personal popularity, again, indicative and positive, these ratings, positive and negative ratings that are difficult to understand. It's a challenge, Dale, for Christopher Luxon to really make personal inroads with the electorate, it seems.
Yeah, I don't blame Chris himself. He's quite a personable guy. I think we all recognise that. The Prime Minister, but the team that he's leading, the coalition that he heads, they're acting like bullies. It's interesting, isn't it, to see Seymour, who advocates for less government intrusion in our everyday lives, being part of a coalition that's pushing through, among other things, the Resource Management Act changes, taking power off the councils for decision-making in housing.
That's Chris Bishop doing that one.
Yeah, but even so, it's still part of the coalition government. And you've got Seymour swanning around at times talking about less governmental intrusion, fast-track legislation that's raised the ire of environmentalists, Maori connections as well, and of course the overarching regulatory standards bill, submissions closed today on it. It's fueled so many more submissions than any other issue and has the chance to override all and sundry. So this can be seen as bullyish behaviour, and Kiwis don't like getting pushed around by people. I mean,
two of those three, I think, are in Bishop's Court, and this is the thing with the three-way coalition, each advancing aspects of their own agenda. I'm certain the ACT leader will be very happy that his Regulatory Reform Act,
Regulatory Standards Bill.
After many decades, will make its way through now into the House. But again, this is the challenge, isn't it, of a three-way coalition? But it's the same challenge that Labour faces and the Greens and Te Pāti Māori face next year, and trying to tell an electorate how they're going to work together. I want to finish, please, with the traditional census going. And I know there have been big problems, and Dale, you'll speak to this as well, big problems with the way recent censuses have been conducted, not only the disruption of the pandemic, loss of trust actually that's been a growing factor in institutions since the pandemic, and also the move online, which just resulted in a whole lot of catch-up work needing to happen. But I'm interested in each of your positions on this. This is used to set electorate boundaries, it's used to determine where health spending goes. And Dale, are there some reservations you're hearing about moving holus bolus, not just modifying or improving what have been some problematic censuses, but that they're going?
Well, again, it's a cost-cutting exercise, isn't it? And, this increasingly digital age, relying on the data that's been collated by government departments to do your intimate and highly focused planning for the future, shortchanges many New Zealanders, including Māori. You've touched on the distrust about furnishing information to the government. There are issues of data sovereignty that haven't been resolved. So to come out and to announce the major changes that the Minister responsible, Reti, has made, I think was a little bit cart before the horse. There's a lot of issues that needed to be resolved regarding census, information and sovereignty that have yet to be resolved, so I think that he's jumped the gun here.
Yeah, look, I think it may have been inevitable. Census, the last two have been a bit of a debacle. I think
but doing it badly, should that necessarily lead to getting rid of it?
It's a challenge that is being faced across basically statistics and information gathering for government. Government is finding it much harder to get people's, ironically, at a time when
so what happens then
more information has been online about people than ever before. What happens then
when you rely on the stuff you do have and don't go looking for the stuff you don't have?
Well, I think the key observation is the one that was made by the sort of iwi data leaders, which is that official administrative data counts those who are in the system. And, so if you're not already engaged in government services, you're pretty much invisible. Now, to a certain extent, that's always been the case in terms of the way policy is made. It's just the way things are. But it is a problem, and it's a problem that is in terms of people's reticence, in terms of this is part of the issue that sprung up with the Manurewa Marae, is that you've got the situation where you literally have people going around giving out gift vouchers and trying to pay people to do the census, which suggests that the data gathering is in a pretty poor state, and that goes into things like economic surveys. That's Statistics NZ says that they're finding it much harder to get people to take part in their surveys and to get good information. The cost cutting is not the answer to this, and just trying to make do, but. There will need to be new solutions, whatever those are.
I thank you both very much. That is Ben Thomas.
Catherine, can I just finish up? I know we sort of sense there's gloomy news around, but having just come through Matariki and Puanga, to both of you, I just want to wish you well. And as a day, I've spoken with many people, as a day for us who call Aotearoa home, New Zealand home, it's got clean hands, hasn't it? It hasn't got the angst of Waitangi Day. It's not an imported public holiday. It's a special day to value relationships. I want to wish both of you and your whānau well, Catherine, Ben, and anyone listening today. We're very lucky to live in such a wonderful land.
Kia ora. I can tell you, I could hear the music till late last night, and someone let fireworks off at 4 a.m, but I'm all fine with it. All good. Thanks so much, Dale Husband and Ben Thomas.